Welcome to Jubilee Coach, where we are free to live and now we live to free. I'm Coach Brian. Today we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I want to open with a question that I suspect some of you have wondered about. Maybe out loud, maybe just in your head. And that is it better to stay single? Now, if you've ever sat in a church service and felt like the sermon assumed everyone is married or married with kids or trying to get married, this episode is for you. And if you are married and you're wondering what Paul's answer has to do with you, stay with me, because what Paul says here reshapes how every one of us thinks about our bodies, our relationships, and our calling. A little background first. Chapter 7 begins with the phrase, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote." Now the Corinthians had sent Paul a letter with questions. We don't have their letter, only Paul's reply. And it's like hearing one side of a phone call. And one of their questions seems to have been this, which is, should Christians perhaps avoid marriage altogether? Or at least avoid sex, even within marriage? Some in Corinth had concluded that the more spiritual you are, the less you need physical things. And that included food in chapter 8, and it included sex here. So Apostle's answer is more nuanced and more gracious than either extreme. Verses 1 through 7. The point is, the body matters. The Apostle opens with a statement that sounds like he agrees with the aesthetics. It is good for a man not to marry, verse 1. But immediately, in the very next breath, he turns it, because sexual immorality is a real and present danger. He says in verse 2, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. And then he says something that would have been genuinely surprising in the ancient world, surprising for both Greek culture and Jewish culture, verses 3 and 4. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, yet yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Now, did you catch that? The apostle applies the principle equally in a world where women were largely property. I'm not saying that it was right, I'm just saying it was that way. The apostle says, within marriage, the body belongs to both. That's not a concession, that's a revolution in the first century. Tim Keller, in a 2005 leadership talk at Redeemer Presbyterian Church, put it this way: sex within marriage is a way of saying to your spouse, I belong completely and totally and exclusively to you. It's a covenant renewal in physical form. So the apostle is not embarrassed by the body. He's not telling married couples to become celibate in order to be more spiritual. No, he says, do not deprive each other except by mutual agreement and only for a season of prayer. And then come back together, verse 5. And then verses 7 through 9 says that singleness is a gift, not a consolation prize. The apostle says something unexpected in verse 7, that he wishes everyone could be like him. He was unmarried at the time. Now, we have to be careful here. The apostle is not saying that singleness is holier than marriage, that he is not suggesting that married people are somehow second class. No, what he's saying is this, that singleness, when it comes with the capacity to live it faithfully, is a gift, just as much as marriage is a gift. Neither is a consolation prize. Neither is the default spiritual status. Calvin, in his commentary on 1 Corinthians, put it plainly, and the apostle does not require others to bind themselves to his rule, but allows them that remedy for infirmity which he himself dispenses with. And this was from Calvin's commentary on 1 Corinthians. In other words, Paul is honest about his own gift and equally honest that not everyone has it. For those who cannot exercise self-control, Paul says, marry. It is better to marry than to burn with passion, verse 9. And that line, better to marry than to burn, is often read as though marriage is a lesser good. But that's not what the passage is saying. In fact, that is the opposite of what the passage is saying. The apostle is saying this, and that is, God has given you the gift of marriage, use it. Don't hold yourself to a standard of celibacy that were never meant for you. Now, verses 10 through 16 says the gospel holds the marriage together, and that's true of all relationships. So now the apostle turns to those who are already married, including those in what we might call mixed marriages, where one spouse has become a Christian and the other has not. And to the married, he echoes the Lord's own teaching, that is, do not get a divorce. Verses 10 and 11. This is one of the rare moments in his letters where Paul explicitly appeals to the words of Jesus, pointing to what Jesus taught about the permanence of marriage. But then he addresses a question that must have been agonizing for new converts in Corinth. Well, what if my spouse is not a believer? Should I leave? And the apostle's answer is clear. No, stay within that marriage. Why? Verse 14. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Now what's going on here? The Bible is not saying the unbelieving spouse is automatically saved. No, the Bible is saying something more subtle, and that the presence of a believer in a household brings that household into contact with grace of God. The children are not spiritually outside. They are, in some sense, covered by the covenant community through the believing parent. Just one of the two. Now, if the unbelieving spouse chooses to leave, then the apostle says, well, let them go. God has called us to live in peace, verse 15. And then this remarkable verse 16. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? What the passage is saying is that the gospel changes the calculus of every relationship, and that you don't know what God might do. So, here is a thread running through all of this. Whether you're single or married, the apostle's deepest assumption is that your identity is not defined by your relationship status. It is defined by your union with Christ. And that is why he can say, with equal dignity, singleness is a gift. Marriage is a gift. Neither one saves you. Neither one defines you. Christ does. And the Passover lamb has been sacrificed. You are already holy, not because your marital status, but because of whose you are. And that frees you, whether you are single, married, widowed, or in a complicated situation, to live for something larger than your own fulfillment. So let me conclude with some questions, coaching questions. Status. How do you honestly feel about your current relationship status, married or single? Is there a story you are telling yourself about it that might need to be revisited in light of what the apostle is saying here? Second, surrender. In marriage or in singleness, where have you been holding back, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, rather than yielding as an act of love and covenant? What would it mean to surrender that place to God and to the person that God has placed in your life? And lastly, sanctification. The apostle says the believing spouse is an instrument of grace in the home. Who in your household, your workplace, or your closest circle might be touched by the grace that lives in you, not by your words, but by your presence? Well, this is it. For the full written meditation with study notes, visit us at jubileecoach.com at the Life Blog section. And if this episode was helpful, please share it with someone who needs to hear that God's grace covers every season of life. This was Coach Brian. We are free to live. Now let us live to free.